As they come up, I'll take the prerogative of asking the first question to all three of you, and then go to Dr. Al-Haji. When I teach your work to my students at TU, which all of them do read it, they end up with a source of frustration. That is, they read David Green's work, and they think that this is a major problem, what's happening with OPEC, and that policy responses should be developed to deal with it because of the monopolization of the market. And while David didn't mention it, he says in some of his other work that were OPEC nations to produce where price equals marginal cost, that the whole world oil market would have equilibrium at $13 to $20 a barrel. Then they read your work, Hill and Stephen, and some of the things we talked about today, and it seems like it's not that big a problem. There's a slight supply disruption risk, but that disruption risk might exist even if it was a competitive market, because Iraq could be invaded or Iran has problems. Even in a perfectly competitive market, they could go offline for some reason like that. And so the threat of monopolization and prices at $100 a barrel when it should be $15 a barrel, you don't seem to accept that notion. And so maybe I thought I would get your comments about whether I fairly characterized what students take away from your work, and to maybe Hill and Stephen, you didn't seem to accept David's notion, which is that OPEC is a Stackelberg monopolist and that they're charging us $100 a barrel when they can produce at $13 a barrel is a problem.
Well, I think I'll go first. I would say I think David actually correctly characterized it. It is a Stackelberg monopolist or some sort of form of monopoly, but that doesn't affect the security premium, which is the externality component, which we're calculating in our work. If you want to calculate a different kind of premium, which is like what is the cost of dependence on oil, you get a much broader answer, like David did.
Yeah, I actually think that's exactly what I would say is that and not only that, but I think that the kinds of policies that you would use are different. I mean, the policy that you would use to, talking about the issue that Steve and I did on the security, is to try to reduce oil consumption would be a good move. It's not clear to me reducing oil consumption is really going to resolve the kind of an issue that David was talking, because that's really a market structure kind of a problem.
Do you think it is a problem? Would you accept?
Oh yes, yeah, that it's yeah, definitely, yeah. So in many respects, our stuff was kind of focused narrowly in that. I will make one final comment, and that is, there's some of the economists and other people who have been around Washington for a long time. I think of George Shultz, for example. He's very, very keen on this oil security issue, but he's keen on it for political reasons, not for economic. He's keen on it because he feels that he feels that countries like Iraq are being, countries like Iran are being bolstered by our dependence on oil, and that these guys are developing nuclear weapons in a region that is very, very explosive. And so he takes it from a political point of view. And I haven't been able to really extend the analysis. I know some of the comments that Steve mentioned suggest that that's not a big issue on some of these issues, but I haven't really, in my own mind, I haven't really resolved that issue. I mean, so you could make a case for it, I think, still on political grounds.
I'm at the end of my rope here. So I think that what Steve and Hill have said is right. This depends on how you look at this problem. If you look at it as a problem of an externality, and you say, I want to measure that externality because what I would like to do is put a tax or a premium on either oil or imported oil, then you limit the problem to just the components that can be identified as external costs. And I think the monopsony price effect is a good example of one that is not a cost if you're looking at an externality, but it is a cost if you're looking at a monopoly. In other words, if you reduce your demand, the price falls somewhat, and if that price is a monopoly price above the competitive market, then you can say, well, I've gained something by doing that. I've taken back some monopoly rent. But if you're looking at it as an externality, you say, well, that's not an externality, so it doesn't count. So it very much depends on how you look at this problem. And I think if you are trying to solve the complex problem of U.S. oil dependence, you need to look at it as a problem of imperfect competition in world oil market. And that leads you to a different set of solutions. Reducing demand is good. Increasing domestic supply is good. Of course, you have to see how much does it cost you to do that compared to what you're getting for it, of course. Changing the technology is good. You really want to do R&D to develop technologies that allow you to use other sources of energy and use energy more efficiently. And so I think it leads you to a different set of policies and solutions than viewing the problem as an externality. Both of them have their place, but it's very important not to confuse yourself, as the OMB sometimes does, the Office of Management and Budget, into thinking that if it's not an externality, it's not a problem. It's not an economic problem. And I think that's a huge mistake that is occasionally made, not by my colleagues here to the right, but by others sort of saying a market failure is an externality. You know, every market failure must therefore be an externality. That's not true. There are other kinds of market failures, and they need different solutions.
Dr. Al-Haji.
It was very interesting to hear David and Steve talk about wealth transfer and the amount of wealth transfer. Then Hill comes into the podium to say that we got money from Capsar, King Abdullah Energy Center in Saudi Arabia, to finance a research project in Stanford in the United States. I think when we talk about wealth transfer, we should talk about the net, because those countries do not produce anything, and they buy everything from the United States and other countries. And whatever excess money they have is mostly in US securities and other financial markets. So the money, the petrodollars basically are rotating, and we should look at the net wealth transfer. The other issue is, it seems that we are looking at wealth transfer since 1973, and that is not fair. In fact, the only academic principle that we can use here, let's go back to the date of the oil discovery in 1935 or so in the Middle East, for example, or 1911 in Iran, and try to calculate the wealth transfer at that time. While the Seven Sisters were making $1 a barrel, those countries were making only 2 cents. So let's calculate the wealth transfer since 1911 and see where we are right now. Thanks.
I'd like to make one comment on that, which is that, yes, in response to the last part, this wealth transfer thing is a parochial adversarial game. Okay, so one wins, the other loses, and can be played both ways. So having said that, I think that the fact that oil revenues come back to the United States and are invested in the United States, and thus do not decrease GDP is correct. But it doesn't change the fact that it is a wealth transfer. Think of, for example, you take some oil revenues, you come back to the United States, you buy some farmland in Iowa, and the farmland in Iowa produces the same corn as before. Thus, the GDP doesn't change. What does change is who owns the land and who owns the corn. So the wealth transfer does matter. It's a parochial economic cost to the United States, an economic benefit to oil exporters. And so on the global scale, there's no economic cost there. But from just the US perspective, there can be a very significant economic cost.
Every single car in those countries is imported. And those cars are manufactured in the consuming countries, and they are creating jobs in the consuming countries, and they are part of the GDP.
Well, I think it's a good thing for the whole world if the all of the people in the world become wealthier and they can trade with each other. That's fine. The fundamental issue here is this a monopoly rent or not? And I think it is a monopoly rent. There's a problem with what I presented, which is you shouldn't try to integrate all those costs over time, because that's a problem of contrary to fact. In other words, compared to what? So if there had been a competitive oil market since 1970, we'd be in a different place in the world today. We'd have consumed a different amount of oil than we consumed, and things would be different. So I think the cost of oil dependence that I show you can compare over a short period of time, but not a long period of time. But I still say that, and I think my colleagues will back me up, that the transfer of wealth is not part of the GDP loss. The GDP loss is something completely separately, and those are two different accounts. So one is actual loss of output. It's an economic loss to the US, it's an economic loss to the world. The other is just a transfer. Who owns what?
This is an important issue because it's very confusing. In some sense, we're talking about wealth transfer as this money slopping over from one country to another, but in a very real sense, there is an economic cost to the United States, although not to the world. And the economic cost to the United States is that if you're trading one barrel of oil with one bushel of wheat, and all of a sudden the oil price goes up by a factor of 2, so it takes you two bushels of wheat for that 1 barrel of oil. That is a real economic cost to the United States, because the United States has to produce more oil, send it over. I mean, more wheat, send it over to the overseas, and pick up that barrel of oil, the barrel of oil, and hence have less of its total production available for the United States. So it is a cost to the United States, but I readily admit that, in this day and age, people are kind of talking about maybe you should be taking more of a world perspective on some of these issues. So, I go back and forth on this, but I think the terms of trade, it is a real effect, and it's more than just money slopping back and forth. It has to do with how much you're giving up to import another barrel of oil.